Shavua Tov. I'm Doreen Dotan in Svat, and it is now about 11:20 at night. As you can hear, the peace of Shabbat is still in our home, hours after it officially went out. There is always the peace of Shabbat in our home. Outside, one hears the normal flow of traffic, but the disturbances of the war do not touch me, do not approach me, and cannot. When one learns Torah correctly, one attains the peace of Shabbat, the world that is always Shabbat, in this world while they're in their body, and nothing disturbs that. I want you to know that because I want you to know that it is not only possible, but that it exists, and that you can have that too. In order for me to see anything that is not peaceful, I have to look through the computer. The computer is, for me, some kind of a prosthesis, something like a microscope or a periscope or a telescope that allows me to see what my naked eye cannot see, because if my naked eye gazes upon something, and includes the glasses, I'll see nothing but peace, because my consciousness is completely absorbed in Torah. But I want to know what other people are experiencing. So I look through the computer and I can see secondhand and not in real time what others are experiencing. And this is the way that I have been gazing upon the war for the last 100 and something days, seeing what other people are experiencing. And it's frankly horrifying on so many levels. I'd like to speak herein about epigenetics, which is a very, very important discovery of late. When I was younger, it was assumed that the Darwinian theory of evolution was correct, and Lamarck was completely wrong. And so epigenetics took a while to be received because it seemed Lamarckian, although it's not, and it had to prove itself, which it has. We know that as a result of extreme experiences, normally they look more in terms of traumas. Traumas change the way genes express themselves in that person, and those changes are heritable, and they show up in future generations. Children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have been examined epigenetically, and it has been found without a question of a doubt that the traumas that were experienced by their parents or grandparents impinge on them in a number of different ways, both physically and emotionally and experientially. The epigenetic damage to the Jewish people did not begin with the Holocaust. In fact, the Holocaust occurred because of the epigenetic damage that exists within the Jewish people from former traumas. The original traumas were the result of incorrect Torah interpretation. There's a very, very intimate connection between Torah and our DNA as Jews. In fact, they're one and the same, as they exist on different levels. The Torah is the genetic and historic legacy of the Jewish people, and reading it incorrectly will invariably lead to experiences that will in turn be traumatic and affect us genetically adversely. So long before there was the Holocaust, there were the expulsions, there was the Inquisition, there was the Roman War, there was the war between Israel and Yehuda, and the Jews have sustained massive intergenerational, intragenerational trauma, compound trauma. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of someone who is traumatized is that they are in a state of dissociation from themselves. That a lot of who they are remains preconscious or subconscious because they don't want to face it. And so there are impulses which they are not able to consciously access that act in their lives, and they attract more trauma. A child who has grown up in a home with trauma is far more likely than a child who's grown up in a normative home, more or less, to induce the same kinds of traumas in themselves, in their lives, and they won't even know that they're doing it. And this is the hardest thread in our lives to really get a hold on, because the Jewish people at this point are so petrified in their ongoing compound trauma that we cannot approach most Jews with the most important realization. I've spoken about this with God's help in other conversations, that we ultimately generate the experiences that we have. If I were to say that to most Jews, they would either go into a hypnotic state of not even hearing me, just close me down and not hear me, or they might even become agitated and verbally belligerent. Very few Jews are ready to make the step which is the sine qua non for the deepest levels of healing, which is to assume responsibility for that which occurs to us. One might ask, is a child responsible for the experiences that they have? The answer is that children are born with the genetic load which they inherited. The brain that they have, the heart that they have, the nervous system that they have has been inherited. And they are going to generate their experiences with that which they have inherited. However, we do not become responsible for our experiences until we develop the ability to think abstractly, which allows us to objectify our thoughts, look at our thoughts from the side or from above and say, that thought is maybe not as productive as it should be. I'll change it. A child has no ability whatsoever to do that until they develop abstract thinking. So a child who is growing up in a society in which the adults have not grappled with what consciousness really is, and who themselves are not at this level of self-control as to be able to look at their minds and decide what is a worthwhile and what is not a worthwhile thought or feeling, are at the complete mercy of the vagaries of life. And that's why it is so critical for adults to go into their own minds and feelings and heal from within for the sake of the children who cannot do it for themselves. I think that epigenetic intervention is absolutely necessary. Not only are the Jews who are now going to war with Hamas still, in large part, Jews who are still carrying the burden of the epigenetic damage that the Holocaust caused for Ashkenazi Jews mostly, and also for the expulsions and the mistreatment that the Mizrahi Jews experienced in the Arab countries, and then they were thrown out when the country Israel was founded. So they started going into this war already profoundly, compoundedly, genetically, epigenetically damaged and traumatized. And this war is going to exacerbate that in the extreme, particularly since so many young people were at that concert, and they were, many of them, under the influence of psychotropic drugs when the horrors began. There is going to be the greatest need in our history to heal ourselves epigenetically as a result of this war. It is also necessary at this point to understand that many of the quote-unquote Palestinians are also Jews. Some of them are Jews who have been in this area for many, many, many generations. That is, they were not expelled into the diaspora, but at some point they were forcibly converted to Islam. Some of them have been converted, having come to this country in the last few centuries, and then were forced converted here. Those Palestinians are Jews who are carrying both the epigenetic damage of having learned the Talmud and it being compounded with the epigenetic damage of learning the Quran. So the Jewish people now need epigenetic intervention in the worst way. However, there are some caveats with that we have to take into consideration. Number one, the people conducting the epigenetic research are themselves epigenetically damaged. And so their perceptions and perhaps their agendas might not be 100% pure. That's a problem that we're going to have to contend with. Another one of the problems that I saw, and I was deeply disappointed by it, I want to speak about it. I was looking up Jewish researchers in epigenetics, and I came across a number of researchers who work together, and they have been experimenting with psychedelic modalities in treating epigenetic disorders. And I'm very much not in favor of that, and I'll explain. I am someone who both used psychedelic drugs as a youngster and attained true expanded consciousness the healthy, correct way. So I know the difference. You see this? I love this. I bought this. It says, old hippies don't die. They just fade into crazy grandparents. Yes, I was once a hippie, and I did psychedelic drugs, which did not expand my consciousness. It altered my consciousness, but it did not expand my consciousness. And the reason why was because true expanded consciousness can only come as a result of very deliberate ascent morally. When we work on ourselves morally, we become more moral than we were. Our reward for that work is expanded consciousness. When we work to become more self-disciplined, to the purpose of becoming more moral, we are rewarded with healthy and long-lasting expanded consciousness. There's no magic bullet to expanded consciousness. One can alter their consciousness, but they can't expand it. So what's happening is someone who takes a psychedelic drug is experiencing things in a way that they haven't experienced them before, or out and out hallucinating, but remaining who they were morally. More important than what we experience per se is how we interpret that which we experience. And psychedelic drugs do not make us more moral. So many people find themselves in the position of having their consciousness altered and having no past experiences to know what they're dealing with, and being on the same moral level they were, and what you get as a result is just a bad trip. One cannot equate taking, let's say, ayahuasca in the context of the cultures that have been doing this for many, many generations under the direction of shamans who have been given direction, as the fruit of which is the fruit, that being the fruit of many, many generations of experience in the context of a set of disciplines and learning, and also being set in a tropical rainforest when they take the ayahuasca. And somebody just dropping ayahuasca at a party in a concrete jungle, you're not going to get the same results. Even if a white person goes to the Amazon and takes ayahuasca, let's say, for instance, of course there are many different kinds of hallucinogenics, under the direction of a shaman, they still have their genetic load. They are still in a New York state of mind, or wherever it is they're from. And so the effects are not the same. I do not recommend taking psychedelics in the context of mental and emotional healing. The work that has to be done is essentially moral work. And the effect of that is becoming more and more aware of our internal world and our external world until eventually we understand that they are one and the same. And we are no longer blinded by the skin that gives us the illusion that there's an outside and an inside. It all becomes one and the same. And in that way we can heal. However, sometimes people are so desperately emotionally and mentally ill that they cannot get a grip. And epigenetic modalities, interventions may be necessary in order to correct people's genetic damage, epigenetic damage, to the point where they can begin to do the work themselves. I think that this is the critical challenge with which we are already faced. We're going to be faced with it more as more and more soldiers come home. And we want to help those young people, because if we do not, the traumas that they have incurred will most certainly be passed on to future generations, and the Jewish people are already deeply suffering. One has to understand here in Israel that we are all profoundly epigenetically damaged unless we have gotten really, really, really deep into correct Torah, not rabbinic Torah, but real Torah, the old school. So in our everyday life, we're encountering many, many people who are profoundly epigenetically damaged, from the local greengrocer all the way on up to the Prime Minister. Everyone in this country is profoundly epigenetically damaged, and it is profoundly distorting their perception and their ability to respond correctly. It's all the business people, it's all the scientists, it's all the doctors, it's all the lawyers, it's all of the judges, it's all of the politicians, all of them. And if we are going to have a normalized state, we are going to have to get a grip on this. And we're going to probably need to develop interventions on the epigenetic level to at least get people to a point where they can begin to work on themselves. Thank you most sincerely for listening.